I am a little sick, so excuse the sickness part. Literally nothing I can really do about being sick, but I don't know. I just want to talk about something kind of very close to a lot of people. Just, I guess I want to talk about what's it like just not hate yourself. It's pretty common. Feels like just about most, if not almost everyone I interact with has at least some form of self-hatred. And just speaking personally, you can get to the point where you just don't hate yourself anymore. It's pretty clear and pretty obvious that that whole structure, trying to do better by hating yourself, it's something you don't have to actually have, something you can let go of. There's almost a fear that if I don't hate myself enough, I won't have the motivation to make change or do what's important. But the crazy thing is that very motivation is what keeps people stuck in that perpetual cycle of hating themselves. And the crazy thing is, cleaner action, type of action where there's no hinge of self, or a type of action where there's just no referencing of judgment of good or bad, can arise pretty spontaneously. But it can only come really when you stop really judging yourself, when there's no more hatred. Excuse me, my throat is really. It's a type of clarity that doesn't cling to hate, but it doesn't cling to pleasure either. There's no attachment really, one way or the other. And yet, it's free to feel hatred, but it's not attached to hatred. And it's completely free to love and feel all the bliss, but it's not attached to it either. It's almost as if it has space for both, even both at the same time. And there's no conflict in being able to love deeply and also feel deep hatred while not identifying with the feeling. And there can just be room for exactly what's arising. And there's no opposite because there's no comparison. It's direct and it's full. It's full because there isn't an opposite side trying to reason why it shouldn't be this way or how things could be better and or how things can be better than how they already are. It's that sense that there's nothing wrong, that there's nothing broken, or there's nothing to fix. There's nothing to fix in you, and there's nothing to fix in someone else, because no one's broken, no one's bad per se. People can have harmful behaviors, people can say harmful things, That's no judgment on the person or the character. Because when there's no attachment to your own incarnation, your personality, your ego, your character, however you define it, there's almost a freedom to just let it be as it is. Because you didn't make it. No one made it, really. It couldn't be a person that made another person, really. It's just this natural, very spontaneous incarnation. And when you stop fighting that, there's this freedom to just let it be as it is. You even give yourself your own permission, have your own insecurities. And when you're not afraid of your own insecurity, you can just completely be incarnated in this unique expression, just as you are. Because there's never anyone just tell you you should be this way anymore. And there's no longer that self movement of let's go this way instead. And all there is just the curiosity of what's manifesting here already, just as it is. When you're more interested in the truth of what's here compared to fixing what's here, there's really nothing to clean up anymore. And yet, if there's harmful behavior, it'll hurt. And if it hurts, it's very natural and spontaneous to self soothe or to take genuine action to relieve any sort of delusion or pain. But it's not something you have to figure out. It's something that kind of just arises on its own, very naturally. You don't have to figure it out. The figuring it out can be the very thing that stops you from paying attention to what's here. The figuring out, the mind trying to exact its will, because the mind really does believe it knows better. And I'm not here to antagonize the mind. That's just a function of mind. Just when you drop that self trying to fix everything, you can no longer turn a blind eye to the exact experience that you're having. And often that experience can seem incredibly painful. So I'm not even suggesting you really dive into the pain if you don't feel like you're ready, or if you feel like you don't want to. Because this sort of intimacy where you don't hide from your own pain is definitely, it's both terrifyingly scary and yet it's also deeply connected more than I don't really know how to say other than it. The closest thing, and yet it's so close that there's no distance. It's so close that there's no separation, that you couldn't say, here I am, and there's the pain, or the vulnerability, or the intimacy. It's not me and it, but that's the only way I can talk about it. And yet, there isn't an identification with it, because otherwise, I'd be taking another identity. There's just a closeness with this tenderness, and there's no distance. But in order to close the gap, you have to be willing to feel all the pain that the mind is pointing away from. Because the closer you get to this type of intimacy, the more painful it feels. When we talk about the shadow, or the unconscious. That's when the attention's on the mind and it's pointing away towards something so close, getting you not pay attention to something so close it can never be separate. And it's a tenderness and a vulnerability that, if misinterpreted, it really does feel like the end of the world. I feel like a needle that's just piercing your heart. It's that close. But the mind interprets it as pain. Is why in no way I can recommend going towards it unless it's the most authentic thing you feel. Because pushing towards this before you're ready, like, it's pretty obvious it's not wise to point toward. You're already drawn to it. But if you are, I can promise you that sense of self hatred, that sense that you've got to fix yourself, or just any sense of something's wrong, it really can end. You just to not be afraid. Something that feels like it's going to pierce your heart and really close the distance between this feeling of absolute vulnerability. So this vulnerability feels non-separate, and there isn't a you and the vulnerability, and there's only this openness, this closeness. But there's no more distance between what you believe, your ideas, any interpretation, and what's direct and here. And you're left with no more orientation, nowhere to ground yourself. You can't hide anymore from something that feels like the most tender thing ever, the very thing your mind wants you to look away from, because it's incredibly painful. But when you're no longer afraid of pain, the very thing that can be interpreted as the end of you, the pain, it's so deep that the only way people can seem to want to avoid it is by trying to fix the pain. But when the pain is no longer a problem and you dive directly, all there is zero distance and a complete intimacy with something that has no preference, no judgment, no movement, and yet it's completely spontaneous. It's everywhere and it moves everywhere. And there are just no more problems. And yet it's not averse to practical challenges. And it's open. And it's actually never gone. You just have to be willing to let this tender, there's literally nothing you can do to, there's no word to really describe it. This tenderness, not run away from it anymore and let it penetrate completely. That there can be no opinion, no belief that can hold its ground. And there's only this openness where there's complete acceptance of what is. In a way, you can call this a love that has no duality, no opposite. It holds everything. I guess the whole point of this video is just to say self-hatred can end, the pain can end, and there can be space for everything, including your normal, regular human incarnation, with its everyday quirks and its idiosyncrasies, its weirdness, and its willingness to engage in love. Thanks for listening.